Welcome into Rounding the Bases Live, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. My name is Joel Goldberg. Quick reminder to everybody that for the most part, you have a little conflict here and there. This show will be at 9 a.m. Central Time daily. So a little bit of a different start to kind of get my day going with this podcast. But I think and hope that there is baseball this month. Yes, it's July. This could be the first month that I've done this show where there's also baseball. And I, quite frankly, did not necessarily think when I started this podcast back in March that it would be something that happened during the baseball season. But now I have no doubt that it'll continue 5 days a week. I don't know. Maybe I'll take a day off here and there. But I think this is all doable. There are stories to tell. There are always different events going on in the country, whether it be the racial injustice protests, whether it be the pandemic. There'll always be something to talk about that affects people's lives and businesses. So my hope is to continue to do this. And 9 o'clock Central seems like a good time. And yes, I said that there is baseball coming this month, I think. I'm wearing this Royals Fox polo today, which I've been wearing a bunch of these anyway. It's about as professional as I get in attire until I have to put the suits back on. But I mention that only because I believe on this type of platform right here that I'm using now, that my broadcast partners and I are actually recording a Royal season preview show for Fox today. And that is a big development because we haven't done anything like that. So anyway, a big thanks again to my sponsor, Enterprise Bank and Trust, hashtag no stopping you. And one of the great joys of this pandemic has been the amount of people that I have met during a baseball season. I usually do that in the off season. And my guest today is a guy that I believe, and he can correct me on this, I believe that Ryan O'Connell and I were introduced back maybe like last November by Matt DeCourcy of Full Scale. And as sometimes can happen, stuff gets in the way, and one guy has a conflict, and then another guy has a conflict, and then a guy gets sick right around the time the pandemic starts. Unfortunately, it was not the coronavirus, and now here we are. Ryan O'Connell is the founder of Boomin, and a guy that I believe, Ryan, we finally first met virtually, early June or something like that, right?
Yeah, just a couple of weeks ago, but appreciate your concern. It was just a common cold I got from my 2-year-old, probably coughing into my mouth. So was glad to not have COVID, and yeah, everything's been good. Just crazy, as you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, never has the common cold been so welcome. When and look, that's the life that we're, and the existence that we all have right now, and then that's just, that's a scary thing too when you're running a business because, obviously you have to take care of your health, you have to take care of your family, but you've got to be healthy enough to run this thing. What's interesting, and one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you on this podcast, and I wanted to have you on as a guest on my other podcast from back when Matt DeCourcy said you got to meet this guy. But I think that so much of your world and your business now, like everybody else, has been affected by the pandemic, but you're in a nice spot where you've been able to roll with that. So we'll talk about e-commerce. I really want to talk about culture, connectivity, and really the way that you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, have really focused on quality over quantity. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but first off, let's begin with Boomin and let everybody know what it is.
Yeah, no, you're dead right. So we started 3 years ago, just focused on trying to be anything to everybody, right, on the agency side, and certainly had a lot of growth and success. And about 18 months ago, we realized that we were just replicating a model that was going to scale ourselves out of actually enjoying the entrepreneurial process. I mean, we started the business, myself most specifically. Yes, I enjoy agencies. Yes, I enjoy the fast pace, but it was to spend time with my family and to have decisions of my own to be able to make. And when you scale an agency and you're constantly adding clients, you've got to be out on the road. You've got to be having 10 sales calls a day. And so we realized this wasn't the model for us. But also you scale yourself outside of having a small, tight-knit culture and team. So we made the decision. We fired half of our client base, which was a little bit scary, but was the best decision we ever made. So at this point in time, we run more of an e-commerce portfolio. So we manage 15 to 18 brands at a time. And instead of doing, a la carte or managed service or management fee, we come in and we actually partner with them. So in exchange for that, we're running every aspect of the growth of their digital business. So for us, that means we have to be that much better at what we do. That means that we are right there with all these entrepreneurs alongside of their journeys, which can be a lot more late nights, even more so than your typical agency model. But it also makes it more fun. You get to experience the wins a lot more. Certainly the losses are a little bit harder, but it makes it a lot more fun, and we're having fun with this model. And like you mentioned, fortunately, with COVID hitting, e-commerce, and certainly would never celebrate and be insensitive to that, but we were lucky to be positioned in that world, because if we were running the same model we were running prior, we're probably out of business, to be honest with you. I'm sure we would have found a way, but we don't experience the growth that we've had over the past 6 months if we are positioned with our old structure and old model.
So this is interesting to me because I think probably the most overused word during this pandemic. There are two. One, what I guess would be an expression or a series of words. The other one would be a word, and I use both of them in my virtual presentations, and I'll make fun of myself for overusing them too. But one is unprecedented times, but it is true. I mean, we have never been through anything like this. We've had disruption, but none of us in our lifetime, same for our parents and grandparents, ever lived through a pandemic, and certainly nothing like this. And two is the word pivot, which again I do think is overused, but everyone in some form or another has had to make some type of a pivot or an adjustment. But it sounds to me like your big pivot really came before all of this. It came with that understanding that you needed to focus on a certain specific number of clients and not as many. How tough of a process was that? Because it's easy to walk away or tell certain clients, hey, we're not going to do anything anymore. It's hard to fire your clients, so to speak, I would think. I mean, how tough of a process was that?
So we were pretty smart about it. I also would say, right, we weren't just this smart and just made the quick decision, fired everybody on the next Monday, and we were rocking and rolling. It took time. We stumbled across a few clients that wanted to move towards a performance model. They legitimately couldn't afford to use us. And that's where we kind of stumbled into, hey, maybe we have something here that we can scale revenue a lot faster and higher by working with a small subset and doing deep work. We talk a lot about deep work with our team and with our clients. But this happened over 6 or 8 months, right? It wasn't a Band-Aid situation where we ripped it off and completely moved. We moved 20% of our revenue to this model, and it worked. It just so happened to be during a Black Friday period, and we're like, wow, we can actually, this is something here, right? And then we moved 50%, and then we came to the decision, like, listen, the other 50% now is actually holding us back, because now we're kind of running two different mindsets, two different game plans, two different trainings with our team. We said, if we want to get really, really good at this, we're only going to do e-commerce. Like we were running successful app download campaigns. We were working with brands that we probably shouldn't have been working with in terms of like how quality and large they were, not in the e-commerce space, and we had to turn away large revenues, but it was the right decision. So I wouldn't say it was hard, because I think we were smart with it, and it evolved over 6 or 7 months. But I still met with a lot of other agency owners inside and outside the space and said, hey, like, what do you think here? And actually had to go against a lot of people that I respect, a lot of people that mentor me, that kind of said the opposite. But again, we kind of took the data and learned from it and evolved over time.
Well, and obviously, that is paying dividends. How I know ultimately everybody wants to have meaningful, or should want to have meaningful, relationships with their clients. But when you are more invested in every bit of the process and reaping the benefits of that process along with those clients, how much more of it is a partnership? I know everybody wants a partnership. That's a lot easier said than done. I mean, oftentimes it's just that that relationship with a client and all the other clients. But how much more personal does this become?
Yeah, a lot more personal. We're actually, it's funny, we're a little cautious for it to not get too personal, because I think one of the things that I really wanted and I love about e-commerce, right, it's black and white. It's how much did you spend this month and how much did you return? And I fell in love with that. That's why we moved into this e-commerce space. But yeah, because we have such a personal relationship and because we're going through things like product sourcing, merchandising, going through profit and loss statements, right? That's not a typical agency practice when you're talking about running ads and building websites. It does become very personal. But I think, at the end of the day, I think the biggest reason, why we've had any amount of success, Mark Cuban said it best, sales cures all, right? Sales cures all every time. And that allows us, because we built a great system and a great team, when we can show progress, most specifically related to profitable revenue, man, everyone's going to be your best friend.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's going to listen to you. And I tell our clients, if you just listen to us 6 or 7 out of 10 times, I promise you, we're either going to figure this out for you, or we're going to figure out that this isn't where you should be, and we should pivot or figure out what's going to be the most effective way for you to make this thing work. Or let's be honest, there's some that just don't make it. And we want to be able to efficiently get to that point and be able to provide honest and transparent feedback to where the business is.
Seems like pretty good numbers too. Just listen like 60% of the time, and we can promise you that this is all going to work out. So I want to talk about the pivot for you in going, and I know that you had a connection with a guest of mine last week, John Hall, who much better than I do, but he was a phenomenal guest. But what was it like to take that leap of going out on your own or co-founding Boomin'? And oh, by the way, I know that you told me, and so we'll throw this into the wrinkle, that was all happening somewhere around the time where your first baby was being born. Oh, by the way, go start a company and have a newborn at home. So take me through that whole process.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I'm super fortunate to have met John and Kelsey, who founded Influence & Co., which is honestly, I mean, they're the top content marketing agency in the country right now. When they were 3 people, it was literally like, we always said we're playing business, like we're playing house, right? That's how small the group was. So I was fortunate to kind of watch them build a company, right? I was kind of on their coattails watching it all happen. And I think that really allowed me to learn enough, maybe not because I was still naive enough to just do it anyways, but learned enough to really understand what it takes to be able to start, kind of kickstart phase agency. And so, yeah, it was interesting. Like I was, had a great job after I had left Influence & Co. Went on to help some other entrepreneurs run the Young Entrepreneurs Council. Got that into a great spot and kind of just realized, hey, I'm ready to get back into the agency world. My wife and I had just been talking about having our first child, and it just so happened that it lined up perfectly. Like we had met a couple of other folks that were interested in being our first clients, and it honestly all happened very quickly. It had been a 6-month conversation of, hey, we should do this. This would be great. This is what we would need to do. And then all of a sudden, it's like the clients were ready. And we were on a phone call at 3 p.m. on a Sunday, getting an operating agreement together, figuring out equity structure, and figuring out who was going to start paying us and how we were going to be able to tell our wives like that this was happening, no job with baby number 1 coming. So it's one of those things that looking back, it felt like it was happened overnight. But if you look back and point to everything, it was 6 to 8 months of conversations and setup. And I also attribute that to like our fast start because everything was so set up. Of course it was hard. It's hard every day. But because we put so much planning and time into it, I think that allowed us to kind of have that jump start. And then, yeah, it goes back to, we all came from being around people like John Hall. Actually, all my partners know John, and I'm sure at some point I've gotten advice from him, and he's just one of those guys that gets it. So having someone like that in your corner, I mean, I go to him, quarterly and say, what are your thoughts around this? Like, what are you guys doing here? How should we attack this? Because he just gets it. And he's also not there to have selfish input. So that's been a huge help for me.
I can't say I was surprised the few times that I've been around him and met him is how selfless he is with his time and his advice and helping others. And I'll just repeat this. I'm sure you've heard it before. I think one of my biggest takeaways was him just talking about finishing up every phone call or meeting and taking a couple minutes just to process and think about that person and amazing the things that you could remember. He had, and then putting those notes, and he had talked about For instance, I might reach out to you on opening day to wish you, good luck, and I'm like, oh well, now I expect that, and so he's lost his element of surprise. I'm actually thinking
Yeah.
about reaching out to him the morning of opening day and saying, I know you're thinking of me or something like. Anyway, I like sometimes to check out the websites, and this one is fun too. You can explain it a little bit, but quite simply, growing brands is what we do best, and now we have some of this in here in terms of background. And tell me about the design here.
Yeah, so our design team kind of had full run at this website, just knowing, listen, like because of the nature of the way we structure our business, this is really a recruitment site for our team. So, of course, clients are going to visit, want to know what we're up to. But our conversations with clients, it's not a sales call and a proposal and a signed agreement, right? It's 4 or 5 phone calls where we get to know them. We're going through the business. We're getting access to back-end data to be able to make a due diligence process in order to move forward. So because of the way we're set up performance-wise, we need to know that that's a good relationship for us to get into. And so, the website, again, is really just an opportunity for our creative team. Since we're working with brands that already have a distinct, creative and branding in mind, we wanted to have a little fun with it. And we always say we're a creative first agency. So 9 times out of 10, we're hiring someone that has a really creative mind and either planning on them, having experience on the marketing side, or bringing them into the fold and into understanding customer acquisition and kind of adding that marketing mind into that creative element. And I think that's what kind of sets us apart a little bit.
So how many people in the company?
So we've got 25 to date.
Okay, 25, and I like that. I shouldn't say I've never heard it that way, but creative first agency. I think that alone, you got 2 words there that really probably describes so much of you guys: content and creative. How much has content in terms of Boomin and its clients changed during this pandemic? I I know there's a question, and it's coming here in a second, about working remotely and how you've been so well positioned to do that. But have you seen, just in general, the nature of content change, or is it sort of the same as it was before?
Yeah, this is one where it's kind of been the same as it was before. Now, in saying that, it gets harder every single day to advertise on these major platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Google. It gets more expensive. It gets harder. And so really what that comes down to, yes, having great expert media buyers is helpful, but it comes down to strategy and, most importantly, the content and creative. I mean, you think about it. You're busy. You're on your phone doing 100 different things. I'm even watching the Royals game. It's going to take a lot to stop me in my feed, especially for me to go to a website and then purchase something. So the content is everything. How you communicate, what you communicate, and so not as much of that has changed. If anything, it's been a little bit more lax during COVID because everyone was stuck at home. And if you're anything like my wife and I, we were just buying things, supporting our business, right? But we're just buying things because you're stuck at home. And so it hasn't changed much, but I'd say generally, if you look over the past 12 months, it's probably the most important factor, and it's the area of our business that has grown the most in terms of where we're investing in our people and where we're investing in our just knowledge and expertise.
So let's talk a little bit about this pandemic, and being in the e-commerce world, certainly a good place to be. But, and I think, right, we knew that before this pandemic, and that'll continue to evolve and change, and who knows the next time something crazy like this comes around. You can't predict this stuff anymore, although we know that the fall could be dicey. But what has enabled you guys, just based on what you had before, to be able to roll through this with everybody working from home and working remotely and not miss a beat?
Sure. So luckily, we made the decision from day one, which is probably more of a selfish decision, but to be remote. We've got 3 partners in the business. We're all in different regions of the U.S. None of us willing to leave the cities that we live in. I'm very passionate about Kansas City, oddly enough, being from St. Louis, but is somewhere I plan on staying for a long time and continuing to invest in the community. And so we said that's piece one. Piece number 2 is, hiring is hard. And so for us to be able to go out first US coast to coast and hire wherever we need based on needing where the talent's at. And then also internationally, we needed to set up a system and a structure that was remote focused. And so we kind of started out just saying, listen, we're going to create a couple of hubs, Kansas City, Chicago, and we're going to have a couple of employees there so we can create some sense of in-person culture. But for the most part, let's build a remote team. Let's look at what other companies like the Young Entrepreneur Council is very remote. Zapier is the best example. They're a Columbia-based company. I think they're like 200 or 300 employees now, 100% remote, 0 offices, right? So they wrote the playbook on a successful remote team, and for us, we've kind of straddled the line of a hybrid between remote and then having and providing access to offices. It's kind of called satellite now that we're coming out of COVID a little bit, to provide people. Some people don't want to work at home, so we provide that, which is funny because when we started, we said, well, let's be remote. We'll save all this overhead money. We won't have this big office with all these bells and whistles. And the reality is, if you line us up next to a Kansas City firm that has all 30 people in one location, overhead's going to be about the same because we're still providing an office and all that for each individual person. But I think we've done a good job recognizing that we're, remote first. We meet every single day, company-wide, 10 a.m. on a Zoom call for about an hour. And it really has turned into, people have said, like, they feel like they're walking into an office. They feel like they can still have, water cooler talk and, shooting the shit a little bit and having fun. And so we were fortunate that was already ingrained into our culture and we had that kind of humming along. So that was one thing that I personally didn't have to deal with that a lot of entrepreneurs did. And for that, like setting aside the e-commerce thing, very grateful that I didn't have to miss a beat with that particular hurdle that a lot of people have to deal with.
So Ryan, let's advance that conversation a little bit, because one of the things that I hear, and I'm lucky enough just because of what I've done the last few years in terms of podcasting and all the networking that's gone with that and the speaking business, that I get a chance to talk to a lot of CEOs, just touch base, how's it going? And one of the challenges, especially those that have big companies, 800, 1,000 people, they're seeing a little bit of that burnout now. They're actually working harder than they've ever worked before. Many of them, and I can appreciate that. So many of us are trying to outrace this whole thing or outwork this whole thing. But they said what's been a challenge is just worrying about people getting that Zoom fatigue, getting that fatigue from being home. Now, maybe for companies like you, certainly for a Zapier, it helps that you were already doing that for the most part. But this is still new to a lot of people. We've become adjusted to it. So what are some other tricks of the trade or just different ways that you guys, because you talked about you can get out there and shoot the shit. You can get out there and have that water cooler talk. But what are some of the ways that you're able to keep it fresh and stay connected with your culture, which I know is so important to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's something that we talked about at a leadership level of how much is too much, because we saw the same thing where, yes, we saw a ton of growth early on and weren't maybe as concerned as the average business owner, thankfully. But everyone was just working more hours and we knew it. Our output was insane, higher than it ever was. And it was like, okay, listen, this is great. We want to take advantage of it, but we don't want to come out of COVID, especially knowing that our heavy season is July through December, really July through Black Friday, and everyone be toast, right? So, we took that into consideration. And I think the biggest thing that entrepreneurs miss is just not asking the necessary questions and meeting the team where they're at, right? We do a really good job. And I don't really believe in the Zoom fatigue thing if you're having meetings that are actually for a specific purpose, right? Our team always finds a way to figure out how to have fun, whether that's in our company Slack or whether that's scheduling their own happy hour via Zoom and all that. And certainly we enable that. But I think the reason we don't end up having that fatigue is because, again, every single time we meet, again, let's just say 70% of the time we meet, so the majority, it has a particular purpose. And everyone has the same mindset. Like, I don't want to waste any time. I work remote. I've got a family or a dog or hobbies or video games or whatever interests them. Like, I want to get onto that. And I think everyone's maybe matured a little bit more within this structure to know that and all be on the same page about that. So again, I think we're fortunate that we don't have that kind of Zoom fatigue as much. And I think a lot of that stems from people just wasting time during meetings. I mean, every business book you've ever read about productivity talks about most meetings just being a complete waste of time. And again, we're not perfect, but again, I think everyone has gotten into the rhythm of like, I'm not going to waste my time because I'm going to value it as if this is my own business. And again, we're fortunate to have very entrepreneurial individuals. There's a lot that comes with that. But I'd take that all day opposed to the opposite, especially with a remote first culture.
Yeah, it's great. Great strategy, great thought there. Just having purpose, being intentional in everything you're doing, and then letting people have their fun when the time is right and they want to do that, enabling them to have that freedom. All right, a couple final things before we wrap it up here. Visiting with Ryan O'Connell, co-founder of Boomin. First question is my culture question. Small ball. What in the Boomin world or in your world? What are the little things that add up to the big things? What are those singles that add up to Royals, not Cardinals? See what I did there. Hey, I know you're a proud resident of the Kansas City area now, so see, I don't have to give you, and I'm okay. You know, I spent a lot of time over in St. Louis back when you were growing up. What's small ball to you? What are the little things that add up to the big things?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. Your people are your greatest asset, and I think that a lot of people get stuck within, I've got to have a monthly or quarterly or annual reviews, and that's the touch point that they have with their team. And the way that we're connected now, specifically related to things like Zoom and Slack and text being okay for managers and peers to communicate on, where previously that may not, different generations, be as kosher. It's so easy to connect with your people, right? And especially in the remote world, you have to spend time checking in, saying, hey, how are you? Like, how are you feeling? Like, what are you doing this weekend? And again, I have a hard time with that because I'm focused on how do we drive business? How do we grow the business? But if you take a step back and just focus on your people every single day, I think that's the biggest small ball that adds up. And it's hard, right? I mean, we've got 25 people. It's a lot to invest in and pour in, but there's no other option. There's no other option to encourage and push and sell. Like, everyone wants to be encouraged and everyone wants to be sold. So you have to be constantly encouraging, whether they're doing a good job or not. That can be constructive or very positive. And then they also want to be sold. They want to be sold on the vision. They want to be sold on what's going on in the company. They want to know. They want transparency. And so I think that's the small ball, but it's also probably a little bit of a bad answer because it's a lot to take in and a lot for an entrepreneur or leader, for that matter, to spend time in when they also have so many things going on.
Well, to me, small ball's your culture, and culture takes everyday effort. As Dayton Moore, the Royals general manager, has told me many times, that you never take a day off from culture, and once you have it, you don't stop. You don't just figure it out and then you're good to go. So it does. I mean, all of this takes effort. Last question for you, and just because you were well positioned to handle this pandemic doesn't mean that it came without its challenges. I say that not knowing exactly what those challenges were, but we all have them. I've said this over and over again. I don't care whether you're a billionaire, and yes, it's a little bit easier up there on top. Doesn't mean everything is solved. To someone that's looking for a roof over their head, everyone has been affected by this in different ways. What has been your biggest takeaway? We're still going too, but what has been your biggest takeaway of this pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's just constantly reevaluating and figuring out ways you can be better. It sounds so cliche, but it's one of the things that my business partner does better than anybody. He sits down and looks at the business and says, here's how we can improve. And we feel like the model we created, clearly so well positioned. We're having a blast, doing very well. But as soon as COVID hit and we saw this huge spike and we're growing, he's the guy that says, let's pull back and let's figure out how we can add 10% more to this, how we can add 5% more to this. And so I think just being aware that you constantly need to be, innovating and figuring out, and maybe you sit down and have that meeting with yourself or with your team and there isn't anything, but to have that structure and to be thinking on how can I change? And then also, again, for the folks that were more heavily affected, how do I have to change? Like, how do I have to change to survive, or to make this a more enjoyable experience or more profitable? I think that's a hard thing for entrepreneurs to do. I still struggle with it because I get so high on our highs where I want to ride that out. And in reality, you've got to be so forward thinking that what you're doing today, has nothing to do with your actual mindset today. It's the mindset and strategy that you had, 3, 6, 9 months prior that you're just executing out.
Yeah. Well, it's you know, and this is true for a lot of us, but certainly you're in a forever changing business, and it certainly seems like you guys are positioned to be able to handle those changes as they come about because of the different types of people and leadership, and I think that open-mindedness, that flexibility that you have and that you've created there in terms of your culture and in terms of what you're able to do. So it's interesting. Last final question, and then we'll wrap it. Where do you want to see this go? Where do you want to see Boomin, say 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road?
Yeah, it's funny. We kind of had this mindset even when we started the business that the agency wasn't the only thing that we were going to do. So we've already started one subsidiary company. It focuses on customer service, really what we call customer astonishment for these fast-growing e-commerce brands. You work with an entrepreneur, you blow up their e-commerce sales, and all of a sudden they're the ones answering calls and emails and Facebook comments, and it's a nightmare. And then they're not able to focus on actually running the business, which then hurts Boomin. So we've created that subsidiary business more so to make sure that we were helping ourselves out on the Boomin side, but that's become a nice little business by itself. And then we also want to launch and start other businesses, mainly being our own e-commerce brands. We love working with our clients. We're very selective and have a lot of fun and great relationships, but to kind of cut out the middleman, so to speak, would be great. We feel like we've got a great playbook. We've got an understanding of what the needs are in the market based off of data. And so we've got some things cooking on that front. Probably we'll launch a brand or two by end of year that will be solely ours as well. So that just allows us to have a little bit more width in terms of our depth. And so that's been our idea from day one. And now we kind of have the ability and a little bit of the leeway to be able to reallocate capital and, most importantly, resources in terms of bodies and our team and our focus.
Well, it's fun to hear the story, and a couple comments that came in. Kiana Sinks, company balancing it out, and Linda Endicott, great interview. I agree with Kiana, so appreciate everybody jumping in with that. And Ryan, I'm glad that we were finally able to do this, and I'm looking forward to, as I said to many guests, to actually meeting you one day in person when we can do that, since we are here both in Kansas City too. I wouldn't call us transplants from St. Louis, because I just was passing through for a long period of time, 9.5 years. You were there a little bit longer than I was and grew up there, but I know that, as you mentioned, love being here, and the cool part about that company, I saw those Bears jerseys on there too, so and a Chicago address on the website, so there is that Chicago influence, which is my home. But I think that we all know that secret, that this is a great place to live here in Kansas City, where we can do any of this type of stuff, and certainly you can run a successful business. So I appreciate you coming on. Congratulations. Let's get the website up again so people can learn more about Boomin. Great website. You get all your information there. And keep it up. Stay healthy, stay safe, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Likewise. Appreciate you.
All right, hang on for one sec, Ryan. Ryan O'Connell, my guest here on Rounding the Bases Live. It's nice to get into a little bit of a rhythm now. Yesterday, I did this triple header Tuesday. I don't know who came up with that idea. Actually, it was me, but it just sort of worked out with some guests that I had and was planning that all fell into that day. And I already had a guest, and I thought, wait, there's a similar theme with all of them. So if anybody's interested and wanted to go back on that, John Rulin from Giftology yesterday, Pastor 83, a very long, deep discussion about racial injustice He's the pastor of a black church here in Kansas City. And then Nicky Lopez, the second baseman for the Kansas City Royals. Today, Ryan O'Connell was my guest. He is the co-founder of Boomin. So I hope, as always, that you'll take these conversations and the content and share it with your friends, share it with your network. That is what it is here for. My name is Joel Goldberg. Thanks to Enterprise Bank and Trust, hashtag no stopping you. I will be back, I think tomorrow's Thursday. Yes, it is. Back with another episode of Rounding the Bases Live. Have a great Wednesday, everyone.